Do you sometimes feel like you are being treated so unfairly, whether in your work environment or in friendships, and you just feel stuck? It feels like you're not going anywhere. Let me remind you of a character in the Bible called Joseph who can really resonate with that. We know he's sold into slavery by his brothers and he ends up as a slave in Egypt and he is bought by Potiphar. And then for 11 years, he works faithfully in the house of Potiphar and he ends up being the second in command upon the entire property. But then Mrs. Potiphar starts a little campaign, which I think we can call today a sexual harassment campaign. But what is interesting, it wasn't just this once-off invitation from Mrs. Potiphar. Scripture says day by day she confronted him. This practically means every day that Joseph showed up to work, he was confronted with a temptation to sin. Day by day. You see, maybe you and I are either in a relationship environment or a work environment. We are tempted to sin. Might not be sexual sin, but it could be jealousy, it could be bitterness, it could be speaking badly of other people. We are tempted to sin on a daily basis. And what happens next is Joseph remains faithful. He remains honorable and he doesn't sin. And yet still he gets thrown into jail for something he did not do. That is so unfair. And being thrown in a prison is an awful place. But what is interesting is that in chapter 40, we learn that most probably this prison that Joseph was thrown into is on exactly the same property as Potiphar's entire estate. This means that Joseph was working on Potiphar's estate or property. He was in charge of everything, and now he gets taken from the house and he gets put into prison. An awful place to be. But Mrs. Potiphar most probably will no longer be harassing him, because I don't think she wants to be spending time in a prison cell. You see, suddenly something that looks like an unfair treatment, a punishment towards Joseph, is probably more God's protection. And to me, that is in line with what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 13, where he says, when you are tempted, God is faithful and he will make a way out for you in your temptation. You see, this is a very practical illustration of Joseph being faced with a temptation day in and day out, and God saying, let me take you out of this daily harassment and I'm going to put you in another spot. It might not be the most lovely looking room with great food, but I'm actually protecting your soul from this sin. And notice what also happens in this prison season is that Joseph gets to meet the butler and the baker, which we know from the story 2 years later leads to Joseph being propelled into the palace. So friends, what I see here is Joseph that is tempted, and God steps in and he actually removes him by protecting him and putting him in a prison season of his life. That is God's protection of his soul, although his body may not be enjoying the environment so much. But it's not just protection, it's also positioning for his next assignment, which is to end up in the palace. So what some of us may be feeling as being stuck, being treated unfairly, could be God's way of protecting you so that he can position you for your next assignment. I hope that encourages you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.